You're listening to Proven Perspectives, a podcast with John Hawkins, the founder of Leadership Edge. I'm Laura, John's daughter, and in each episode, we'll explore a topic related to life, leadership, or mentoring. Through over 50 years of faith in Christ, John has learned proven life and leadership perspectives that will equip listeners for a lifestyle of leadership in their marriages, families, careers, communities, and churches. Happy birthday, Dad. We're recording this on a very special day for lots of reasons. So let's start there. Happy birthday.
Thank you, Laura. It is amazing. This is my 70th birthday. And quite blessed by God to have gotten to this age and, be in good shape generally and just be so blessed by Him. So thank you so much. Yeah.
Well, and I was thinking about, remember how a while ago we did a podcast and it was like the stages of old and there was like young old, old, and old. So like is 70, like are you moving to a new bracket of old or where do you fall on the spectrum?
I was telling someone the other day, I have my own kind of spectrum of denial, like different levels of denial that I live in. But I would have to say, even with that, I've got to at least be old by now. Maybe I'm old, I don't know. But surely 70 is
That's
old.
That's funny.
But again, I feel great in the moment.
I'm so glad. Well, you're such a blessing to us and so many other people. So anyways, and as we kind of already touched base on, this is a very special episode, not only because it's your birthday, but we have a very special guest and just a really great topic, and then an announcement about the Proven Perspectives podcast. So yeah, lots to cover today. Would you introduce our very special guest in today's topic?
This is the dearest person to me in this life, and it is my wife, Janet. We have been married almost 47 years and have had, we call it 47 years of marital bliss and a few interesting moments along the way. But Janet, we're so glad to have you on with us today. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a joy to get to be here.
Talking today, as Laura mentioned, it is my 70th birthday, but also this month that we're recording in April, this is mine and Janet's last month before we retire. And so we both work for Leadership Edge Incorporated and have for a long time. And at the end of April, Janet will fully retire and I will go to 2 days a week, but we're calling it retirement. And so we wanted to do this podcast on the topic of finishing well and just talking and thinking about what does it mean for Janet and me to finish our careers well. And then also as at least I'm getting older, I'll let Janet speak for herself on that. As I'm getting older, what it means to finish my life well and finish up the years that God's given me on earth. So finishing well will be our topic for today.
That's awesome. Well, and I think that this is like such a, powerful topic. Both, I know some of our listeners are maybe kind of close-ish to you guys' age. And so maybe it's like a phase that they're currently thinking through how to enter. Or for like younger listeners, I have said this before, but I feel like it's such a gift to get to learn from you like a generation ahead, because I think there are a lot of implications just for the direction of life today. So I'd love to, Mom, I think we're going to start with you, and I'd love to just like have you flesh out kind of some of what Dad said a little bit more. You've had a really interesting career path, and I hope you'll explain a little bit about that. And so I'd just love to hear like through the years and the different, the different responsibilities, what have been kind of the consistent calls of God on your life, and how did that work out through your commitment to our family and the church and our career? So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, thanks, Laura. As a young Christian, close to 50 years ago, 47 or so, it was impressed upon me that there are three things that last forever: God, His Word, and people. And so I've tried to build my life and focus around these three things, and to involve people in my life and in our family's life. So when our kids were little, we lived in Fort Worth and Hope College Ministry at TCU, and we lived really close to campus. so that students could walk over and be involved in our family life and help me fold diapers with Laura. She was the only one that I folded diapers with. Then we moved to disposables. But yeah, so we always tried to have people in our home, and it's been such a blessing. But regarding my career, I have had an interesting career path. When you, Laura's our oldest, was approaching school age, a huge decision was, how are we going to educate you? We considered homeschool, Christian school, public school, and we felt that God was leading us to put you in public school. And so along with that, I felt like it was very important to be an asset to the school so that we would serve, but also have a voice in the culture. And so as your mother, I saw public school as one of my spheres of influence. So I told the parent-teacher organization, PTO, that I would volunteer wherever they needed me. And this was like 1987, and computers in education was just coming into the scene. And that's where they needed help. So even though I knew nothing about computers, there was one person who did. And that's where I learned computer skills. Over those years, as I was stepping forward as your mother in public school, I began to learn those computer skills and then turned around to teach teachers, which is a perfect way to learn. And so those skills I gained in computer education led me to become a computer instructor when we moved to Durham a number of years later. And that led me to being offered a job at Blue Cross Blue Shield in the IT training department, which later led to me becoming a technical project management manager. So it wasn't my academic training so much as God weaving together the circumstances and me stepping forward as He led to develop my career path.
And then, Jenna, tell just a little bit about, how did you get from Blue Cross to Leadership Edge? Like, how did that part happen?
Well, we had been praying for years that I would be able to leave the corporate world and come to work at Leadership Edge alongside John, and really believed in what Leadership Edge was doing. And our youngest child, Will, had gotten through undergrad. We had some financial milestones because I made a lot more money at Blue Cross than I did moving over to Leadership Edge. So, and then also I am a breast cancer survivor. And there's just a sense of that God was leading, for the remaining years that I had. And at that time, this was back in 2012, I didn't know what the length of my days would be. I still don't know what the length of my days will be, but I just felt that I really wanted to move to something that, to Leadership Edge, that I really believed in the mission, and been very grateful to get to partner with John and the Leadership Edge community.
No, that's really good, Mom. And it's neat how, I guess the way that it looked at different phases of life was different. Like at one point you were, working in, like you said, a corporate job, but the support that you always were, in some ways your work there was also facilitating a lot of what Leadership Edge was able to do. So kind of, it's interesting how like the role has looked different in different seasons, but kind of the mission behind it being honoring God and serving our family. And yeah, thanks for sharing that. And so, Dad, what about you? Like, how would you reply to those same questions?
As I've said on the podcast a few times, the Lord, I called it rescued me, saved me when I was 16. And one of the things I realized then was I didn't know all that it was going to mean to be a Christian, but I did get the sense early on that it meant He wanted everything. Like He wanted my whole life. He wanted every part of me. He wanted me to live out all of my life for Him. And so I think I've looked at my career as just different contexts or different places in which He wanted me to live out my whole life for Him. So when Janet and I got married, we were both grad students. We had very little money. So I was, early on, I was a maintenance man, kind of a custodian in a kind of a blue-collar factory kind of place, and did that for a while. But then Janet and I decided we could start a cleaning business on our own. So we started All Clean Professional Cleaning Service and ran it for 12 years. But then during that time, Janet and I were volunteering at Hope Church in Fort Worth as the leaders of the college ministry. And so then eventually I was being paid part-time to do that and still run the cleaning business. And then in 1990, sold the cleaning business and went to work full-time for the church for 3 years. And then in 1993 is when we started Leadership Edge. So it's been a interesting path. I've laughed through the years. I think finally, when my mom was near death around her mid-80s, she was finally able to explain to her friends what her son does for a living, because it has been a different path. I think she was very proud of me, but it's a little bit different way to go.
Doesn't lend itself to a neat title.
But, with Leadership Edge, we felt called to help people's lives not to be wasted, and for them to live out all the God-honoring influence that God has for them in very purposeful, intentional ways and around a life vision statement. So I think, kind of like Janet said, I think the call has been the same throughout the years. He wanted every bit of my life and every bit of my influence for him. But the different jobs I've had were just different contexts, different places where he wanted me to play out that role.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Well, so, and I know like with finishing well, there's a number of different, aspects of that. But in terms of your career, since that's what you're kind of finishing up right now, I guess, Dad, we can start with you on this next one. But I guess, what specifically does it mean to you to finish well? And like, are there any verses that inform how you think about finishing up your career? Or at least, your years with Leadership Edge. I know you've joked about getting a job as a Walmart greeter. So you could have another career coming. But as far as your Leadership Edge years, what informs how you think about finishing that up?
Well, it's kind of like when we make evaluative statements about a worship service. We say, man, that was a fabulous worship service. And I've thought through the years, like, says who? Like, if it's a worship service, the only person who can say it was good or not is God, because it was directed to him. And so he's the one who says if it was good or not. I think the same was finishing well in my career. Like, I think what God would look for from what he says in the word is that I've done it in faith, meaning I've trusted him along the way, and that I've done it for his honor and glory. And so that really is kind of the core thought, is just have I been faithful to him through the years, like trusting him, looking to him, depending upon him. And in my heart has the longing been for him to be honored and glorified. And I will say that that's gotten purer over the years, but I still, certainly have ways to grow in it. But I think you also think of, you hope you've been a blessing to people. You hope that those you've worked with and those you've served, that they've been benefited through your service. With Leadership Edge, especially, hope that I've left it in better shape than it was when I began. But when I began, there wasn't a Leadership Edge. So I guess anything's an improvement. But just that as best I was able to, that according to the part I've played, that I'm leaving the organization in a good place. And Todd, our president, is just wonderful as our leader. And it gives me great joy just to see where the organization's at. So I think it's those kind of things, that I've been faithful, that it was for his glory and honor. Hopefully people have been benefited and blessed, and the organization's left in a good way. Those are some things.
No, that's really good. Like a few of the things that you just mentioned. One, I guess this first one is, you talked earlier about like all of your life being for his glory or for his purposes. But when you were just talking, like the ideas of like finishing well means finishing by faith and like for his glory and in a way that's a blessing to others. That's all really good. So, so Mom, what are your thoughts on that? Like, what guides your thoughts in terms of finishing your career and especially your time at Leadership Edge well? Or are there any verses for you that are kind of help you think through it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my career at Leadership Edge has been such a blessing and gift to me from God. And as was mentioned earlier, it was a hope and prayer for many years before I was able financially, and that we felt like God was leading for me to leave the corporate world and come to work for Leadership Edge in 2012, and getting to partner alongside John to grow and expand the women's services.
Mm-hmm.
And a verse that gives me perspective is Ephesians 2:8-10. For by grace you have been saved through faith. It's so much His grace, not of my own doing. It is a gift of God, not a result of work, so that no one may boast. For we are His workmanship. I am His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them.
That's good.
And I think He had some good works for me
verse.
to do at Leadership Edge, and to invest in younger women, and to support the technical, and kind of as a very, very small nonprofit. I got to wear many different hats. And for this season, God had those good works for me that He had prepared beforehand. And I feel like that particular season is over. He has something else for me going forward. Don't know all the particulars of what that is, but kind of as John referenced, I think generally I have served well, and it's my hope that people have been blessed.
That's great, Mom. And the verse that you shared was really great.
And Laura,
Thanks for
I
sharing that.
had a verse I forgot to share, but it's just one phrase out of 2 Timothy 4, where Paul's recounting his life. And he says, I've fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. And, Leadership Edge hasn't exactly been a fight or a race, but there have been things to push through and to move through and to get through. And keeping the faith amid all of it. So that's a verse that is in the back of my mind, hoping that, on my last day with Leadership Edge, there can be that sense that I've fought the fight, I've run the race, I've kept the faith. Yeah, so that's a good one for me.
Well, and with both of you guys, like with what you just said about like the idea of like fighting the fight and finishing the race, and Mom, when you talked about just the idea that we were created by Him for good works and we're His workmanship, I feel like with both of those verses, it's kind of in the framework of like it's not about us. There's like something bigger that's happening, which kind of reminds me of the last podcast, but just that idea of I felt like was kind of shared among all of those men, of the idea that like we each have a role to play with joy, and it's not about us, but just playing our role well. So I feel like that's a really helpful way to think about it. So anyways, before we move on from discussing like finishing careers well, I'd love to hear, is there anything that you wish that you could do over again, or any, I don't know, regrets is kind of a strong word, but like looking back on it, are there any insights that you have to draw from that? Mom, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, overall, there aren't regrets. But then as I thought, I think one thing is when I came to work for Leadership Edge in 2012, we were a small, either had 3 or 4 employees, counting Dad and me, your dad and me. And so I reported to John, and that's a hard thing for a marriage to, in a business relationship, to report to your husband. And sometimes I didn't respond right when John didn't think my ideas were brilliant. And, there were times that caused tension, and I chafed. And so I regret that. It was a maturing process for me, and really helped when Todd became president and I reported to him.
Yeah, I can see that.
All in all, it has been a great adventure and camaraderie, and just the blessings of getting to do ministry directly alongside John. But yeah, that is something that I regret.
Thanks for sharing that, Mom. And Dad, what about you? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I haven't thought of regrets. though it could be that the Leadership Edge staff could help me think of some things I should regret. But the thing that came to mind as I was thinking about this, Laura, was just, I wish I'd had more wisdom at different times along the way. And I don't know that God faults me for that, because he was growing me and I was learning. But there have been some different moments in the history of Leadership Edge where we were not really at a crisis point, but we were at some really hard points. And at some of those points, I just didn't know what to do, and kind of personally, but I also didn't know how to lead us through it. And so I trusted him and I did the best, that I knew to do. But I think there are a number of times along the way, if I had just kind of had a better sense or clearer thoughts as to how to think about something and how to lead us forward, that would have been better. So that's the thing that came to my mind.
So do you have like a thought of, so here's what I could have done differently, or it's just kind of the reality of being a...
It's interesting. As I think about a few of those difficult moments, I honestly still don't know what I should have done. Like it's not that it's gotten clearer to me, because I think that one of the things that God does with employees, including the founder who I am, is he uses the organization to change you, to change you and to change the employees. And so there were times along the way when all of us, were on the journey, like we're growing. And I think that it's difficult to know even still how I could have just thought through those moments clearer and known how to guide, and even maybe sometimes how to confront. Those don't at all, they don't haunt me, and I don't think about them very often. But when I think about things to change, those kind of things do come to mind.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Thanks for sharing that. Well, so now we'll kind of broaden it out from career to just finishing your lives well, which is not to infer that on your birthday that you're nearing the end. Hopefully we have quite a few more years with you guys. But I guess if we're talking about this subject, I'm sure you have given thought to other areas of life. So like, what are your thoughts as you consider finishing all of life well? And Dad, we'll start with you on this.
I am 70 today, and I'm in great health and I can do pretty much everything I want to do. And I think my mind's still clear, but you don't know. You don't know, do you have days left? Do you have decades left? And you also don't know, the quality of life. As I've thought, there's not many easy ways out of this life. But again, kind of like as I've thought about with my career, I just think, well, he wants me to be faithful to him to the end. And faithful mean really believing in him and trusting in him. And he wants me to live my life for his glory and for his honor. So I've thought that my life is still to be a life of service. I think that as I continue to get older, maybe service more from the backgrounds than from up front. I hope to always be a blessing to Janet and for me to care for her well. And then there are a few verses that I jotted down that I'm thinking about these days. One is Psalm 92. It says, "The righteous flourish like the palm tree and grow like a cedar in Lebanon. They are planted in the house of the Lord. They flourish in the courts of our God." And the righteous there are not like superhero Christians, but it's just people who live righteously from the Lord. But then it says, "They still bear fruit in old age. They are ever full of sap and green. And their whole purpose is to declare that the Lord is upright, that he's my rock, and there's no unrighteousness in him." So it seems like what God's wanting me to do is keep being fruitful, and he wants me to declare to those around me the uprightness of God, that he's been the rock of my life, and that there's no unrighteousness in him. So that's one. And then another one is, this is talking about Jesus. Now, before the feast of the Passover, this is John 13, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father. So he knows his life is about over. And it says, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And that's what I hope will be true for my life, is as long as I have, that the people that God's given me to love, that I'll love them to the end. And maybe the ways I can show or express that love will change as the years go on. But like Jesus, that I would be able to love people well, even to the end. And then the last verse, which has been one of my favorite ones, this is Jesus again talking near his death. He says to his disciples in John 14, I'll no longer talk much with you, for the ruler of this world, Satan, is coming. He has no claim on me. So he's saying Satan can't make me do anything. But he says, but I do as the Father has commanded me, meaning I go to the cross because that's what my Father wants. And then he gives a reason, so that the world may know that I love the Father. So he's saying there, the whole reason he's going through this is to prove to the world that he loves God. And I hope that there's some shadow of that true about me through the years, that I will live in a way to where the world sees that I will obey him and do anything he calls me to do because I love him. So those are just some passages that have been of help.
Man, I feel like these are like all of the verses you guys are mentioning are just such great. There's just so many good, like when you were talking about loving people well to the end, or there was another verse, but yeah, this is all really great. And Mom, I love that Ephesians verse that you were talking about. So Mom, going back to you, I know you're significantly younger than Dad, but what are your thoughts and what guides you as you think about finishing your life well?
Yeah, well, I am in the decade before John, but I'm only 10 months younger than him. So I'm quickly knocking on the door myself.
Yeah.
But, I think the key is maintaining gratefulness and perspective on the goodness and faithfulness of God. And he who has been faithful through the years, time and time again, that he will be faithful in the days, weeks, months, and years ahead. So I think that perspective is what guides. And as the Psalm 92, they still bear fruit in old age. They are ever full of sap and green. Sometimes, I was going to make a joke about being sappy. But to declare that the Lord is upright, he is my rock and there's no unrighteousness in him. Just to remember that for myself, and then to testify to his goodness, his faithfulness, his righteousness.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Well, and I know, Dad, you've talked on the podcast before about you hope that your life will be a God-centered adventure. So I guess, what do you mean by that? And how does that relate to these older years in life? And Mom, I definitely would love to get your thoughts on this as well. So whoever wants to start us off on that one.
Shall I go, Janet, or do you want to? Good.
I'll go. So, living a God-centered adventure has been one of our life themes over the past 30 or so years. When we moved away from Fort Worth, that was about 28 years ago, to establish Leadership Edge at Duke. I guess it was 30 years ago. The theme of our going away party was Stephen Curtis Chapman's The Great Adventure. I wish it was playing in the background as we move towards the end, but it just a few excerpts. I opened up the Bible and read about you and me, said we'd all been prisoners. God's grace had set us all free, and how he talks about being freed by God's grace. Then because of that, saddle up your horses. We've got a trail to blaze through the wild blue yonder of God's amazing grace. Let's follow our leader, follow him into the glorious unknown. This is life like no other. This is the great adventure. So that is, I think, how we've lived. We've kind of lived on the edge financially many times, with having people in our home and just trying to seek him in the great adventure. And, I didn't so much I don't feel like God necessarily gave me the vision originally for Leadership Edge, but he called me to follow and be a helper to John. And so I embraced the calling that God had put on him. And then through that, now I do have a life vision that we, by God's grace, to step forward as his woman in my spheres of influence to serve his purposes for his glory. So
That's really good, Mom.
has been a great adventure, and I think it will continue.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. What about you, Dad?
She answered it great. Maybe the only thing I would say is just, God-centered adventure, you begin with him and what he says, who he is, what he wants. And so you don't think through, what do I want to do first? You don't think through, you don't begin with yourself. You don't even begin with your circumstances. You begin with, who is he? What has he said? What is he calling us to do? And then you have to get to yourself and your circumstances. But, as we move into our retirement years, it doesn't change. You could get the sense, well, now we're just going to kind of lounge around the pool and, just take, easy days. But no, we begin with him and with what he's calling us to do in these years. And we live out these remaining years with him in the center and with us, hopefully humbly and gratefully following him. Yeah.
No, that's really good. Well, and Mom, I loved the way that, everything you guys shared was great. Mom, I loved the way that you described just like the way that it has been an adventure and the way you guys have like lived by faith and whether that was with finances or other areas of life and then like living in God's grace for, hard seasons or seasons. That was very encouraging as far as looking forward, for what God wants to do in my life or in my family as well. So thanks for sharing that. So I know that we have some listeners that are, as we talked about earlier, that are like kind of around your age, and then some are younger. So as we wrap up this episode, what encouragement would you give them about finishing their lives and careers well? Mom, would you start us off on this one?
Sure. What comes to my mind on this is Philippians 3:12. And Paul is talking about the righteousness of God, and 12 through 14 excerpts. Not that I have already obtained this righteousness or am already perfect, but I press on to make it my own, because Christ Jesus has made me his own. Then jumping down, but one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. So as I finish the career, my life hasn't ended, and may this be my aim, to press on towards the goal of the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus.
Awesome. Thanks, Mom.
Laura, I think for me,
Dad, what about you?
For our listeners who are our age or maybe much younger than we are, I think this kind of last thing we've been talking about, like your life being a God-centered adventure, I think that wherever you're at in life, whether you're in your 20s and just beginning your adult life and your career and maybe marriage and family, whether you're in your 30s and 40s and just slogging through the really kind of pressured kind of years of life, or wherever you're at on the spectrum, you begin the same way every day. Who is God? What is he like? What has he said? What does he want? What does the word say about him and from him? And then you work out your life from there. So I think that looking back, we've communicated, we didn't know how to do this, but we were learning how to follow him. And we just kept following him, and he kept leading us, and here we are. So I encourage our younger listeners at any place and stage of life, just every morning begin with him and pray to him, be in the word. But don't go too quickly to yourself or your circumstances. Just stay on him for a little bit. And then as you get a clarity again about who he is, then begin to think about yourself and your circumstances, your responsibilities for the day, and follow him, trust him.
No, that's really good. Well, and I think that my takeaway from both of you guys, there were just so many great verses. Like, Mom, when you were talking about that passage in Ephesians about like, we are his workmanship, so like we belong to him, and we were created by him for good work. So like to live a life that honors and glorifies him. And then Dad, when you were talking about like in these later years, wanting your life to testify to the faithfulness of God and to hopefully be a blessing till the end. I mean, I think there were so many great things that both of you share. Even Mom, when you were talking about maybe the vision came first to Dad, but as you kind of partnered with him, I mean, there were just so many good takeaways. But I think that those verses were some of my favorite things. Mom, did you have anything else? I just realized that you wanted to add about like to younger adults. Any thoughts that you have for them?
No, I think I didn't really have anything to add.
Okay. Well, yeah, I just thought that all of this was so helpful. So thank you guys so much. And Mom, thank you especially for being willing to share kind of your insights from life. It's been really helpful. And Dad, I know
it's a joy to get to join you on this special episode.
Well, and Dad, I know we have a special announcement to our Proven Perspectives listeners. So it's a little bit bittersweet. You want to tell?
Yes, I do. Share? Well, we've been doing the podcast, Laura and I have, for, Janet, is it 5.5 years that we've been doing this? Yeah, for 5.5 years. There's well over 100 episodes that we've recorded. And I will say this is not the first one that Janet's been on. I think she's been on at least a couple of other ones. But we started this podcast as a way to kind of capture just some of the things that God has taught me or has been teaching me through the years, and for us to be able to share them. Laura and I talk about them together. And with our retirement, we have made a decision that we will stop recording new episodes of the Proven Perspectives podcast. So this will be the last episode, and we felt like it was really poignant and meaningful to end with the idea of finishing well. So the podcast episodes, the 100 plus of them, they will remain online, available throughout the years at the different podcast resource places that you listen to your podcast. So we encourage our listeners to continue listening to them and contacting us if we can be of any help. But we also want to tell you about another podcast that's going to be coming online May 1st that is just going to be wonderful. Todd Melby, the president of Leadership Edge, and Tim Safley, our communications director, are going to be doing a podcast series called Vision-Led Life. And it's going to be about all kinds of people from all kinds of places and stages in life, and how the life vision statement of Leadership Edge has guided them in being the people that they are today and in living out their faith and faithfulness to God today. So that will launch on May 1st. And you can just search for it where you find your podcast, Vision-Led Life with Todd Melby. Or you may, I'm not sure how they're doing the feed, but if you are a subscriber to the feed for this podcast series, you may already automatically get it. So just be on the lookout starting May 1st for the Vision-Led Life podcast series. And then, Laura, just want to thank you. Could have never even thought about doing this, much less doing it without you. We've told this story so many times, but the board of directors of Leadership Edge wanting me to, capture my legacy messages. I'm out visiting Laura and I'm like, Laura, I just don't know where to begin. And Laura said, well, Dad, your best way of communicating is one-on-one. Why don't we do a podcast together? And I said, well, great, but I've never even listened to a podcast. And you said, well, we'll do it together. And so that began the podcast, and Janet and an MBA student were trying to figure out the technology and all that part in the early days. And the Lord's blessed it, and people's lives have been touched through it. So, Laura, just to wrap up, I want to thank you so much. This has been one of the great joys of my life, and that I got to do this with you was just phenomenal. And you are quite the podcast host, facilitator, whatever your title is. You're really good. So with all that, Laura, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you have the last word on this one.
Well, yeah, it is fun to get to do this last episode together with Mom because, and Mom has been on, I think, 3 other episodes, but yeah, we kind of all started doing it together because Mom was editing it. So it's fun for us to get to finish it up together. But yeah, all I have to say is thanks, Todd, for letting me be part of it. I don't think initially I was even part of the plan, but it's been such a gift to get to do it with you, Dad. I've loved it. And so thanks, Dad. And thanks, listeners, for joining us.